Good afternoon, Dr. Handa. I am so excited that I finally got you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you.
And it was so awesome to be able to spend time with you this weekend in Savannah at Airway Palooza. It was an incredible conference. And again, just so excited to have been able to spend some one-on-one time with you. This is for all of the listeners. This is a very important provider to have on for me. This is a provider that I work closely with and will continue to work with in the future because she creates this experience for her patients that is literally like no other that we will definitely get into today. But first, I would like for Dr. Handa, if you want to share your story and kind of where the shift came from you, like where you thought you would be when you graduated dental school to where you are now.
Yeah, great question, Brittany. For me, when I went to dental school, it's sort of because my dad told me to go to dental school because he's a dentist. And I think I was so young and made a decision to go into the field because, hey, there was nothing else to do. And I think I always struggled with the fact that parts of it were so disconnected from the rest of the body. And that at times almost so mechanical. And even though we work in such tight, small spaces, at the end of the day, I didn't get quite the feel, oh, what did I really do to impact and make a difference? So I think through my career, I was always looking at building relationships, listening to my patients, finding their why, and constantly educating myself to almost find that supreme joy in healing people. And it wasn't until I went to a spear lecture a few years ago by Dr. Jeff Rouse where I felt, oh my gosh, this might be it. And it was about sleep and airway and sleep disordered breathing and finding your Jake. And of course, I was my own Jake and my kids were my own Jakes. And then there were Jakes everywhere. So I think really for me, it was connecting to that deep, profound feeling within myself of, wait, I'm here to impact people's lives. And now I have an avenue to do it besides just fixing their teeth, which I'm not undermining fixing teeth because I think that getting older and having teeth problems myself now, I understand how important my role is. But, airway trumps everything. So for me, it was like a coming home of this flame I had carried forever.
And I love that you talk about the patient's why, and you and I chatted about this a little bit before, and the importance of listening to their story. Can you share a little bit more on that and what you feel like really listening to the patient even does to their nervous system?
Yeah, I think, sometimes as healthcare providers, we're so busy, we're so rushed. We also hear almost the same story so many times. So we also have the curse of knowledge. So we add 1 + 1 to 2 before they've even finished speaking. And we already know what they need, what they want, what this is going to cost, why they might say no, why they might say yes. But instead, if we simply sat down, knee to knee, eye to eye, and engaged, not asking yes or no questions, but really engaged from the bottom of our hearts and asked why they were there, what they really wanted. What they wanted might be so different from what you think that they want. And it's really important to distinguish between want and need, because we could need so many things, but we only do the things we want. So, I need to exercise every day, but I want that Starbucks coffee this morning. There's a big difference between the two. And I think creating that, the way you speak to your patient, the way you listen, the way you lean in with your body language, the way you ask questions based on what they shared, it's a beautiful dance. And at points, you're going to realize that you're leading, but in your leadership and humbleness, you actually allow them to lead at times, because the more they speak, the more they hear themselves. The more they hear, the more they share. And you are creating an open space to share whatever they want. They often ask me, where should I start? And I say, where do you want to start? And what would you not tell your dentist? I
Right.
want you to start there.
Mm-hmm.
And as they hear themselves, they say things they've never even said out loud or acknowledged. And my job is then to weave it back to them. So I might say, so what I'm hearing you say is, when you were 12 years old, you had your premolars extracted.
Mm-hmm.
And what I also heard you say is around that time you started getting headaches.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really cool because then they say to me, do you think they're related? Instead of me saying, you have extraction retraction syndrome. And
Mhm.
so
It's incredible for them to be able to come to that realization on their own, even though you might have somewhat steered the ship a little bit. They're really the ones that got to the final destination.
right.
I love that.
And to see that like light bulb moments
Yes.
leads to another light bulb moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in this sort of space of co-discovery,
Mm-hmm.
there's not ever a moment that we don't learn something about ourselves or something new or something through their eyes.
Right.
So I think listening to your patient is already shifting them into empowerment, owning their why, and also stepping into healing. Because I think they start to say, wait, I'm not rushed. I
Mm-hmm.
just have to talk about stuff on this forum.
Right. Right. Absolutely. I think that that's so important. And, I shared about that a little bit in terms of myofunctional therapy, because especially when we take our first myofunctional therapy course, we obviously are armed with all this new information and we want everybody to hear it because everybody should hear it. But we don't want to overwhelm the patient. We have to meet the patient where they are and kind of hold their hand and walk them through like the sequencing, the sequencing of events. And we just have to be able to your point, hear what your patients are saying. You might see X, Y, and Z, and those are all very valid things and things that do need to be taken care of. But their why is going to be what their commitment to their treatment program is. So always reiterating and going back to that, like, what was the patient's chief complaint? Because that's what got them to your office. It's just so important, especially when we're working with adults. Like, it has to be important to them, and I even talked about in the lecture too, when it comes to kids, it has to be important to the child. It has to be important to the parents, and both parents. You can't really have one parent on board, one parent not on board, because how are we ever going to be involved in such a compliant-based program when we don't have all parties involved doing it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, the flip side of what we kind of just talked about, the patient that comes in that doesn't really believe in what it is that we're doing or saying, or that provider that you're talking to that isn't drinking the Kool-Aid that we're drinking, like, how do we handle that fight?
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point you brought up, because in any sort of revolution, there's always been a fight, right? And even when you look back historically, the perception is that there was a fight, but was it really a fight? So there are, Mahatma Gandhi, for example, managed to do a lot of non-violent ways of getting my country to be free. So in my opinion, I think fighting with that provider or fighting with that patient is not going to get us anywhere except make us really angry and put us in sympathetic state, which is not what we're wanting to be. So in my opinion, again, it's leading that dance with interest. So it happened in my own family. My brother's a dentist back home, and during COVID, he had a plan where they extracted my niece's premolars for orthodontics. I had to have this difficult conversation with him because I just couldn't not honor what I was feeling, that it was so wrong. And I learned in that intimate discussion with my brother that I love him dearly. He's my baby brother, and he's like, we just don't have the evidence. We don't have the evidence here, and I'm doing what we're supposed to do. And it helped me understand that even the provider who's fighting us is doing it from a place of, they think they're doing the right thing. They're doing their evidence. And guess what? Change is scary. So the minute you can acknowledge that to this person on the other end almost fighting with you, saying, you know what, I totally get it. Change is scary. There was a time the earth was supposed to be flat, and then one day it was round. So it's scary. I totally get it. But in all of your wisdom and how much you care about your health or your patient, I'd invite you just to have a look at some of the evidence out there or listen to some stories. Because you know what I've come to understand is, even though now I believe airway trumps everything, I'm open to the fact that something else might trump airway. It's just opening the door to something else, life, breath, longevity, cure, a natural cure really to so many chronic illnesses. You can't help but think, what if? And medicine doesn't have all the answers. That case that failed, I wonder why it failed.
Right.
That medication that I constantly have to take, I wonder, would you be able to put on your curiosity hat at times? And I think in that the fight goes down. And the other way to not fight the system, our patients are ambassadors. My patient yesterday got released, tongue tie release, and she had all of this amazing, like, shoulder, toe, neck, all these releases. And she
saw
said,
that on your Instagram.
saw that. And she said, my daughters are in public health, and how can I get them to spread the word? I said, exactly what you're doing, because your daughters, people like your daughters, are the cheerleaders of this work.
Absolutely. And I think, to your point, to staying open and just allowing yourself to be open, not so closed-minded, and let maybe your ego or thinking that what you learned in school is like the absolute, there is no other possible way, it does not matter, that's not what I was taught. You also have to stay open to that continued, like, you're almost always a student, right? There's always something to learn. And I love this about you, because I feel like every time I talk to you, you're learning something new to improve upon the experience that your patients have. And I know, recently you took a class, or you were away for the weekend learning a lot about fascia. And I think, especially as a release provider, like, the understanding, having a deeper understanding of the fascia and how it really impacts the readiness for a release, how the release is going to go, the recovery of the release. Can you share a little bit on that?
Yeah, I can. In fact, I think that, part of what your job is as a myofunctional therapist is brilliant and amazing. And I think it goes beyond the exercises, because as a provider, you have to pick up on nuances and subtleties within the body. And you can really only do that if you're dropped in and present and really in tune with your patient. So I think your work really makes up the bulk of this patient's ultimate journey of the tongue tie release. When I do the tongue tie release, I am the tip of the iceberg, but I'm not all of it. And the one thing that I'm learning about fascia is that how enormously complex it is, how it's all connected. It literally is our exoskeleton. I think all of us providers who are releasing tongue ties should really consider stepping outside our lane and just learning more about fascia, to put it in the back of our head, to almost revere this piece of tissue that we're going to release, and to understand, what's the blood supply, what makes it, what's in the connective tissue, how does it get scarred, what's the role of cerebrospinal fluid in this connective tissue, where does it start, like, what's the role of craniosacral therapy in kind of modulating this fluid within our exoskeleton. What are all of the organs it encompasses? Because it's not just about the tongue. And I know many providers understand the deep frontline fascia, but the more you understand even deep frontline fascia, learning from people like Tom Myers, I'm going to be doing a dissection course with him next year. I'm
Cool.
just waiting for his new dates to come out, but I really would love to see under the, skin. Um, Also just being mindful, like doing a lot of like, I also personally get some fascia work done with a therapist in Arizona,
Mhm.
and learning like even like how our patients walk, sit up, lie down, speak. Those are all basic fascia movements that ultimately affect their tongue tie outcome.
Mhm.
And even when they're doing their exercises, there's so much going on inside the body that only they know. And
Mhm.
sometimes if they're not present and tuned in, they're going to miss those little, for me, for example, I have my head turned to the left a little bit and I can feel a little knot on the back releasing.
Mhm.
So I think the patient's journey in this fascia journey is patient's involvement, engagement is as important as the provider's engagement. It isn't something that can be done to the patient.
Right.
The patient can't just, have busy back to back to back to back meetings, show up and say, hey, I'm here for my tongue tie release. Sorry, I didn't get to do myofunctional therapy. That's just not, it's going to work for a day. And
Mhm.
it's not going to work because that connective tissue so wants to reattach.
Mhm.
It's body memory, it's connective tissue. That's what it does. It wants to reattach. And it's like teaching ourselves a new way of being.
Right.
That new way of being is to get coached.
Mhm.
And that's why I think your role is so, so, so important.
Thank you. And then I guess that would be a good place then to talk about your release. You were telling me you had a tongue tie release yourself, didn't do the myofunctional therapy part. So do you want to share about your experience with that?
Yeah. So I was, all like goo goo gaga, learned everything. Oh my God, I have a tongue tie. Like I needed release like yesterday. Um, I went down actually to a class and I didn't intend on getting it released, but I watched all day and then I was asked if I'd get mine released. And I was like, okay, it's now or never because I'm so scared. I don't know if I want it. But I had it done. And I had amazing, amazing feelings of like I was breaking out of a prison in my cheeks, my neck, my torso, down my legs. I had an emotional release. My neck felt like I could turn it back like an owl. Like the world was unstoppable.
Mhm.
Because the world was unstoppable, 2 weeks later, I'm at the mall at Crate and Barrel carrying 2 big bags of glasses because now I have no body. Like I am like amazing. I feel amazing in
Mhm.
my body. And suddenly I froze because my entire left shoulder, neck, back froze. And it's taken me almost 2 years to get it back to almost normal.
Mhm.
And I think what happened is because I wasn't myofunctionally ready,
Mhm.
my fascia got stuck because I've been to the orthopedist, I've been to the chiropractor, I've been to every therapist, and they're like, you just have tight fascia. Just have tight fascia. Well, I have tight fascia because I didn't prepare my fascia
Mhm.
for a big thing like a tongue tie release. So that was my personal experience with not doing myofunctional therapy.
Now, do you do readiness appointments with your patients before you do their tethered oral tissue release? Now, I know the answer to this, but I want everybody else
Yes, I do.
to.
So I see them in person 2 weeks prior, not 1 week prior, 2 weeks prior. And the 2 weeks prior is because I really want to see them in person to see if they have compensations. If they do, then we have 2 weeks to work on it,
Mhm.
right? And then I also want to see how they hold their tongue up, suction hold with numbing gel. So I place the numbing gel twice, like I would the compounded numbing gel. It's fairly numb.
Mhm.
And then I have them show me how they're going to hold it. Sometimes we have to practice because when we forget, when they get numb, they can't do as good a job.
Mhm.
So they take the numbing gel home and practice as well.
Oh,
I
I love that part. I don't think I knew that part. That's awesome.
Yeah. So they can practice with it. It's a different
Right.
feeling.
Absolutely. And another thing that I really want you to talk about is just how important it is to you and really how important it is for the success really of the treatment to create such like a safe and healing environment for your patient. I mean, yes, for all procedures, but I feel like especially when you're doing a tethered oral tissue release. So can you talk a little bit about that and how you create that environment?
Yeah, sure. So I think part of that, even at that first visit, we are training their nervous system to be receiving of that procedure. Because oftentimes when you release that tethered oral tissue, the sympathetic shifts to parasympathetic, and that's something, Dr. Zaghi had me prepared for, like, be prepared, like the heart rate will crash and you got to be ready and da 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 da. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want to be in that shoe. So for me, it became so important to have them more relaxed so they're not so high and low.
Mhm.
Um,
Now you monitor their heart rate through the entire procedure?
Yep. Yep. So what we do is we have the heart rate monitor on, and then we take their blood pressure that day, that morning off. Yes, mostly the heart rate monitor. But what I find is that if I take breaks during the release procedure and do some craniosacral fascia release that I learned through the Gillespie method, their heart rate beautifully stabilizes. And it's also a time where it's a good space holder for if I'm waiting for, a small, tiny bleeder to stop bleeding, or if I'm waiting for the tethered oral tissue to simply reveal more of itself to me. Because if they're in that fascia release, believe it or not, the piece of connective tissue that wants to be released comes forward in the tie.
Wow, that's beautiful.
So it glistens, it's got the whole connective tissue glisten, and so it's wonderful. And it's a wonderful way of keeping them relaxed. I often will ask them the day of the release, what's not their chief complaint, not many of those reasons why they're here. I ask them for one word. What's their word for the procedure? So yeah. And you know what? That word really holds the space. So it's not about, what can go wrong, what can go right. It's not a place to talk about like post-op right now. What's your word? So yesterday's word for the patient was peace. And
love it.
yeah, and she came back to that after the release. And for this reason, I have my patients sign the consents, ask me the questions, make the payments, not the day of the release. I don't want to do any of this housekeeping with them the day of the release.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Now a little shift from the operatory or clinical space to more personal, professional. And this was big for me, and I think you and I had chatted about this on the phone a few times. And it took me from, I started being a myofunctional therapist in 2016 to literally this past January, and I'm still working on it, but I've done a great job this year in setting boundaries for myself because it's so important. I mean, I have to be healthy in order to be able to help my patients, right? So being able to stay on task, keep those boundaries, be present, be mindful in the moment. And we talked a little bit about this before, we started recording. And if you want to share those little tips and talk about, what you're currently doing to help yourself stay mindful, stay on task with whatever it is, you're working on.
Yeah, thanks. So one of the things that I learned from a coach was frame control. So frame control is where you're in charge of that frame. So say a mom comes in and now you're with the child and now she's like, oh, don't feel this, don't worry about that, I got this, blah, 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 and asking all these questions. Now the mom's in charge and you're not in charge. So frame control's a great way to think of, well, how can I be in charge of the frame of this story while respecting everybody else, the mom, the child. And I like to do that by actually starting to create what it is that I want to accomplish, like what are my goals, because that helps me keep centered. So say the goal in an appliance adjustment is to adjust the appliance, but most of the appointments getting taken up by, his visit to his cardiologist, then I'm not going to reach my goal. And so to at some point be like, hey, I'd love to hear your story. And what I'd like to do is finish what I'm doing, and then let's spend time in my office chatting. So, we can meet our guidelines. The other thing I'm doing is I'm constantly looking how to self-improve. So I found this course on Mind Valley, and I forget what it is, but it was about focus, because most of us airway people are nuts and crazy.
And you mean that in the nicest way.
I do. We are always chasing that next thing to study because we can't get enough knowledge, right? Like we are obsessed with learning more. So we're always chasing down every single rabbit hole and every single permutation combination. So I think what the disadvantage of that can be is that it's so much information that it can be overwhelming and you don't know how to integrate. And while you're on this crazy airway learning journey, you still have to look at running a practice, human resources stuff, bills, writing your notes, making it to your child's concert in time, trying to cook healthy and not ordering takeout again, because guess what? You are not being a good patient when you're eating Chinese takeout and wine every single night. So what I started to do based on this thing that I learned is anytime my mind wants to shift and do something else, I give myself 10 minutes before I make that shift. So if I'm talking to you, but I want to check my phone, I'm noting the time. I'm going to wait 10 minutes before I check the phone. And I'm going to notice what I'm feeling in this moment. Just put a word to what I'm feeling. Am I anxious? Am I bored? Am I sad? Am I tired? Oh, maybe I need water. I'm also going to notice where I'm holding, if I'm holding tension, where am I holding it in my body? And go back to actually some of that breath work we did with James Nestor, like that synchronized breathing and, the 5 in, 5 out breathing. And we're like, okay, I need a reset, because guess what? I also am a patient. And I love learning from that person on the workshop where he called us patient one.
Yes.
The Tiger Institute guy. Because we have to be patient one, because guess what? We have to model health to the people that we're selling health to. We are selling health and we are selling a better way of living, but we've got to live it. And the busier we get, the harder it gets, because you got no time. You're exhausted, no time, not sleeping. Well, guess what? Look at your own sleep numbers. Just in this process, I have turned perimenopausal, and my bruxism started to shift to that casual purring, as James Nestor called it, to the purring and the, oh no, I don't snore. My patients snore. I don't snore. Me? What?
Yep.
So it's creating those boundaries around, it's kind of creating our own boundaries. We shared a patient at one point who drove us like bananas. And I think that, and I think I said this to you, that boundaries are sexy.
Yes. I'll never forget that phone call. I was on my way to D.M.D. I was in the car. Honestly, though, I love that. Yes, boundaries are sexy.
Because when boundaries are sexy, the patient feels safe. They may not like it, but they're going to feel safe and they're going to feel better eventually. So I think that's my 2 little bits on boundaries. Boundaries are sexy.
I love it. That's going to be the title of the podcast.
Yeah.
So I was telling you earlier, I was being interviewed on a podcast earlier today, and she asked me this question that I absolutely love, and I want to start asking my guests. So you're going to be the first one. What advice would you give your younger self?
The advice I'd give my younger self is to be confident and to embrace every mistake that I made, to cherish the person that I always was, because no one could ever take that away from me and my essence. To really listen carefully to advice being given, to see it through your own lens. Is it somebody else projecting onto you? No, is this really you? So my advice to my younger self is don't ever forget your essence,
Mhm.
because even when you die, your essence is going to stay. So who are you? Who do you be? And how do you bring that best version of yourself out to the world?
Oh, I love that. I just got the chills. That was awesome. Thank you. Is there anything else that you'd like to leave the listeners with before we wrap up?
No, I think that the only thing I'd like to say is just be you. Do you, be you.
Absolutely, 1,000%. And even that, that's something that you have to make a decision to do every day, right? It is continually something that you work on. And that's something that I noticed even with the boundaries part. Like I can say I'm going to set boundaries. I could say I'm going to give up some control because I am I'm a control freak. I'll just say it. My husband would agree. I'm a control freak. And it's something that I have to exercise every day, and like mindset and getting myself ready for the day. But if you choose to do that and you choose to put yourself first in that way, not only are you going to reap the benefits, but your patients and your families and your clients are going to reap the benefits. And I mean, what's better than that?
Nothing's better than that. And even reframing, Brittany, that the world has told you that you're a control freak. You didn't wake up and say, I'm a control freak, right? So what if you rephrase that and just said, I like to have an organized day. So I think we also put labels on our own selves
This is
all the
very true.
time that are not even our labels.
Mhm.
Yeah, you like to be organized, and that's why you're doing what you're doing, and that's why you're causing this big change in people's lives.
I love that. And I love you. Thank you so, so, so much, Dr. Handa, for coming on here, for sharing all of your incredible insight. You are a very, very just powerful and insightful woman, and I'm blessed to know you and work with you and learn from you. So again, thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming on today.
Thank you, and likewise.